Hey guys, in today's video I bring you an impressive and chilling story. Let's meet Sullivan Dwyer, an Israeli soldier who died in combat and had a terrifying near-death experience. He believed he was doing his duty, but when he crossed to the other side, he was taken straight to hell, where he found the souls of those he killed. And at the most desperate moment, Jesus appeared and revealed a shocking truth that changed everything. What he saw will leave you speechless. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this intense and transformative journey. My name is Sullivan Dwyer. For most of my adult life, I was a soldier, a man of war, someone who believed in duty, discipline, and the mission I was given. I grew up hearing that men like me were protectors, heroes, shields against the evil that lurked in the world. I never allowed myself to question whether that was true. War was my religion, and I was a faithful devotee. I was serving in the Middle East in Fallujah, a war-torn city where the dust and smell of gunpowder seemed to be part of the air we breathed. My men and I were part of a patrol sent to monitor a group suspected of collaborating with enemy forces. Captain James Holloway was a practical, tough man, with no room for doubt or hesitation. He looked at us and said, "No hesitation. If you see anything suspicious, eliminate it." The mission was simple, and I had already done it countless times. I was a soldier trained to follow orders, not question them. We walked through the narrow streets, rifles ready, eyes alert for any movement. Sweat dripped down my face as we walked forward under the merciless sun, tension growing with each step. It was then that we saw shadows leaving a destroyed building. I stopped, adjusted my aim. The group was made up of a young man and some women. An informant, perhaps an enemy collaborator. We couldn't be sure, but we had orders. My finger pressed the trigger, ready to fire, and it was at that moment that everything changed. I heard the shot before I felt the pain. Something hit me in the shoulder, a fierce impact that threw me to the ground. The world spun. My senses were confused. The dust mixed with the metallic smell of my own blood. I heard voices around me, screams, gunshots, but everything seemed distant, as if the world was moving away from me. My vision went dark. My body felt heavy, as if I were sinking into an invisible ocean. For a brief moment, I felt terrified. Then came peace. It was as if all the weight I carried, the deaths, the battles, the fear, the anger, had been lifted from me. I was floating, going away. Then it dawned on me. I was dying. The first thing I noticed was the absence of pain. The weight of my body disappeared, as if I had been untied from something invisible that tied me to the earth. I saw everything from above, as if I were just an observer. My body lay on the ground, bloodied, while my companions desperately tried to stem the flow of blood from my shoulder. The sounds of battle echoed as if they were far away, muffled, like a poorly tuned radio. I wanted to scream, to let them know I was there, that they didn't need to worry, but my voice wouldn't come. There was no mouth, no throat. I was just consciousness. And then, something pulled me. I felt a movement, an irresistible pull dragging me backwards into a dark tunnel. But the strange thing is that instead of feeling fear, I was overcome by a feeling of deep peace. It was like, for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about anything. The darkness was not terrifying. It was soft, welcoming. There were no walls, but I felt like I was being led down a path. There was a low sound, like a distant hum. Every moment, the darkness became less intense, giving way to a golden light. And then, I came out of the tunnel. The light was so intense that it took me a moment to adjust. When my eyes, or whatever I had there, adjusted, I saw where I was. It was a city of impossible beauty. The streets seemed to be made of polished gold, shining in a light that came not from a sun, but from everything around me. The buildings were tall, majestic, built of shining stone as if they had been carved directly from the light. People walked around, wearing flowing white clothes, smiling at me with expressions of welcome. There was no fear, no anxiety, no pain, just absolute serenity. Then I understood. I died, but instead of terror, I was overcome with a strange acceptance. I deserved to be there. I had done my part, served my country, fulfilled my duty. If this was heaven, then I would finally receive my reward. But as I took my first steps into the Golden City, something began to change. The air became heavier. The golden glow seemed to dim. as if a shadow was spreading across the perfect buildings. What was once a heavenly refuge began to transform. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't paradise. I continued walking through the city, but the beauty that once dazzled me now seemed wrong. The golden glow that enveloped everything began to fade, like paint fading in the sun. The majestic buildings, once imposing and solid, began to crack, and an unsettling silence took over the environment. The people who used to smile began to disappear, first, as if they were moving away, then evaporating into the air, leaving a void around me. The sky, previously illuminated by a warm and comforting light, gradually darkened, as if invisible clouds covered its source of brightness. My heart, if I still had one, began to race. Something was wrong. This was no longer a heavenly refuge. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The streets stretched endlessly, curving in impossible directions. With every step I took, the environment around me became darker, more distorted. The buildings began to crumble with agonizing slowness, collapsing as if they were just illusions, revealing an infinite space of darkness and fire below. It was then that I heard the screams. They started as murmurs, indistinct echoes, but quickly grew in intensity. They were voices of suffering, of lamentation, of despair, voices of men, women, children, familiar voices. The ground beneath me disappeared, and I was sucked under. The fall was endless. The wind burned my skin, and the remaining light disappeared completely. What came next was absolute terror. I fell to my knees on rough, hot ground, burning like live embers. I raised my head and saw the landscape around me, flames that rose like walls, thick smoke that made the air almost unbreathable, and crowds of shadowy figures, walking aimlessly, bent under the weight of invisible burdens. And then, in the midst of those tormented figures, I saw them. Amir. Recognition was immediate. He had been one of my platoon mates, killed months earlier in an attack, but he wasn't as I remembered. His body seemed to be carried by something invisible, a force that was bending him downwards. His eyes were empty, but when he saw me, something flashed inside. Immeasurable pain. Sullivan, haven't you ever wondered where all the blood we shed went? His voice was hoarse, full of resentment. I didn't know what to answer. And then beside him, other faces began to appear. Men and women I saw die in combat. Some were Allied soldiers, others were enemy combatants. But there were no sides, there were no flags. Everyone was together, suffering the same fate. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized one last face. A boy, his thin body, his eyes wide, his skin dirty with dust and blood. He looked at me without blinking. There was no anger in his eyes, but a pain I couldn't bear. Elias Karim. I knew his name, not because he had been an important enemy, or because there was a big story behind it. I knew his name because I killed him. During one mission, we entered a house suspected of housing terrorists. We follow orders. We open fire. Inside the small room, Elias was crouched, holding a ball of rags. He didn't do anything. He didn't react, but it was in the way, and I pulled the trigger. There, in the middle of hell, he looked at me with the same eyes as when I last saw him. He opened his mouth and asked, "Why?" My entire body shook. My mind screamed for an answer, any justification, but there was nothing I could say. The darkness seemed to swallow me. The voices around me grew louder. The faces of the victims multiplied. And then, something changed. Everything went silent, and a light appeared, strong enough to drive away all the darkness around me. The entire hell froze the instant the light appeared. The fire stopped moving, the shadows retreated, and the screams that filled that place abruptly ceased. For the first time since falling into that torment, I felt a sensation other than fear and guilt, an indescribable relief. The light grew, expanded until it took over everything. I closed my eyes because their glow was so intense that it seemed to pierce my soul. But even without seeing her directly, I felt her presence. It was not an ordinary light, like that of the sun or a lamp. It had weight, it had heat, but it didn't burn. It was a living presence. And then, in the midst of this absolute clarity, a figure began to emerge. At first, it was just a human figure, a silhouette of pure light, as if its body were made of the very essence of that glow. But as he got closer, his features became clearer. I recognized him instantly. It was him. There was no doubt, There was no mistake. I knew exactly who was in front of me. Jesus. But he was not like the paintings and statues I have seen all my life. He didn't have the sweet, soft eyes that the pictures tried to portray. His eyes were deep, as if they contained the weight of all existence. And yet there was something about them that I had never seen before, an incomprehensible love. He looked at me, and in that look, there was no judgment. There was no condemnation. Just an absolute knowledge of who I was, what I did, what I experienced. You forgot peace. His voice was not loud, but it filled the entire space. She did not echo through hell. She replaced hell. The moment he spoke, I realized that this place no longer had power over me. I tried to respond. I tried to justify myself. My mind was still stuck on what I was taught. I was protecting my people. I just followed orders. Jesus shook his head sadly. It was not a gesture of reproach, but of regret. When you ignored human life, you forgot the true meaning of peace. You are not being punished. It is being taught. Words hit me like a blow. All that torment, all that pain, it wasn't a punishment. It was a reflection of what I did, of what I caused. But my voice failed. My mind was still trying to understand. I didn't want to be a bad man. He took another step closer. I could feel his presence like a wave of heat, but not a hurting heat, a comforting heat. You were never a bad man, Sullivan, but he made decisions that brought suffering. Now you understand. My legs gave way. I wanted to fall on my knees before him, but I couldn't move. All I did was look at him, with tears that weren't even really there streaming down what was left of my spiritual face. So what do I do now? Jesus smiled, a smile that carried no judgment, no indifference, a smile that brought truth. Forgive, choose peace. And the moment he said those words, everything around me disappeared. Hell did not dissolve slowly. It was erased, as if it had never existed. The fire, the screams, the shadows, everything was gone. I was enveloped by the light of Jesus, and my conscience was filled with absolute peace. And then I heard a distant sound, a sound that became increasingly louder. Voices, shouting, sounds of boots running over the dirt floor. And that's when I woke up. I woke up with a jolt, as if I had been pulled back into my body. The first thing I felt was pain, an intense, cutting pain in my shoulder, radiating throughout my chest. My ears were ringing, and my vision was blurry, as if I were surfacing from underwater. I heard voices. People shouted orders around me. Someone was pressing something against my wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The weight of my body felt like it had suddenly returned, as if I had been thrown back into the gravity of the world. He's alive, a voice shouted near me. I wanted to speak, but my mouth was dry, my throat burned as if I'd been through a sandstorm. I blinked several times until my vision began to clear. Then I saw familiar faces. My platoon, soldiers all around me, covered in dust and sweat, with mixed expressions of shock and relief. One of them, Parker, was holding my arm, pressing a makeshift bandage to my wound. His face was pale. He shook his head, as if he were seeing a ghost. Damn, man. We thought we lost you. You had been unconscious for minutes without a pulse. Minutes. To me, it felt like hours, days. My mind was still in shock. The images of hell still burned in my memory. The faces of those I met there. The words of Jesus echoing like a mark embedded in my soul. Forgive. Choose peace. Looking at the faces around me, at the weapons in their hands, at the smoke still rising from the rubble in the distance, I felt something different inside me. Something had changed. It was as if I was seeing everything for the first time. And for the first time, war felt wrong. I forced myself to speak, my voice coming out hoarse, almost a whisper. Where are we? Parker looked at me like it was a stupid question. Still in Fallujah, brother. Still in hell. But I knew that hell wasn't that place. It wasn't war. Hell was what we carried inside us. They put me on a stretcher, loading me into an evacuation helicopter. My body was weak, but my mind was racing. I was trying to process everything that had happened, everything I saw. How could I just continue after that? How could I go back to war after what Jesus showed me? I knew at that moment that something inside me had broken, and I could never be the same again. The next few days were a blur. I spent most of the time unconscious or drugged by morphine. When I finally regained full consciousness, I was already in a military hospital in Ramstein, Germany. The first thing I did when I woke up was look at the white ceiling and realized it was alive. But Contrary to what I imagined, this realization did not bring me relief. I was alive, yes, but who was I now? The experience I had haunted me in my dreams, in the moments when I was alone, in the silence of the sterile hospital room. I saw Elias Karim, his young and innocent face, asking why. I saw Amir, bent under an invisible weight, looking at me sadly, and above all, I listened to the words of Jesus, "Forgive, choose peace." The problem was, I didn't know how. One morning, Captain James Holloway appeared in my room. He had the same serious expression as always, but something in his eyes told me that he was assessing my condition beyond the physical injury. He pulled out a chair and sat down next to me. "Good to see you're still with us, Dwyer. I thought we lost you." I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell the truth, tell him that I had died, that I was in a hell built by my own actions. But who would believe that? He crossed his arms and continued, "We have a good plan for you. You can recover and then, if you want, resume your position. His record is impeccable, and we cannot afford to lose good men." It was at that moment that I understood. I had two options. I could accept that, follow the path I knew, recover and return to the war as if nothing had happened. I could bury the experience inside me and continue killing, continuing to be a good soldier, or I could do what Jesus told me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. I had never questioned orders. I had never questioned my own loyalty, but I couldn't continue on that path any longer. I looked up at the captain, and for the first time, my voice came out with a firmness I hadn't felt in years. "I'm leaving the army." His expression immediately hardened. "Dwyer, do you know what you're saying? You have served with us for years. You are a soldier. If you leave now, what will you do? Go home and pretend nothing happened?" I swallowed hard. The truth was that I did not know. What would you do? He had no answers. But one thing was certain. I couldn't continue. "I saw something, Captain. Something that changed everything. I can't kill anymore. I can't be part of this anymore." Holloway looked at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "You will be called a traitor. From weak, there will be people saying you're crazy. Are you prepared for this?" I closed my eyes for a moment. "We Elias. We Jesus." So I looked at Holloway and gave the only possible answer. "I am." And in that instant, my fate was sealed. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I would never go back to war again. The following days were a mix of bureaucracy, suspicious looks, and silence. My request to leave the army was received coldly. I was called to several meetings, questioned by senior officers who wanted to understand my decision, but the truth was that no one really wanted to listen. They just tried to dissuade me. I was warned that I was throwing away years of service and respect, that I was leaving my brothers behind. Some tried to convince me that this was just a temporary trauma, that I just needed time to recover, but I knew that wasn't it. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a truth I could no longer ignore. The near-death experience showed me that I had spent years believing that war was necessary, that my role was to fight for my country, to protect my own. But the truth was that I had never stopped to ask, what were we really protecting, and at what cost? One by one, my companions visited me. Some looked at me with pity, as if I were a broken man. Others were angry. "I don't understand, Dwyer. You were one of us. How can you just abandon everything?" said Parker, one of the soldiers who had helped me the day I was shot. "I'm not abandoning anything. I can't be a part of this anymore." He laughed in disgust. "Can't you be part of this anymore? Dwyer, we've been here together for years. This is not a joke. You trained for this. You killed for this. And now you want to pretend that everything was worthless." I knew he was frustrated, but there was no going back for me. "I can't kill anymore, Parker. Not after what I saw." He crossed his arms and stared at me for a long moment. "What did you see?" The words caught in my throat. How would I explain? How would I tell him that I had been to hell, that I had seen the souls of those I had killed, that Jesus appeared to me and said I needed to forgive? Then I realized it didn't matter if he believed it or not. The only thing that mattered was that I knew. I saw everything I did. Parker looked at me for a moment, waiting for more, but I didn't say anything. Eventually, he sighed and shook his head. "If you leave, Dwyer, you can never come back. You know that, right?" I nodded. "I know." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing the right thing. When I received my official discharge, I left the military base carrying only a backpack. My uniform was still folded inside it, but I knew I would never wear it again. I took a flight back to the United States without knowing exactly what I would do next. All I knew was that I couldn't live the same way anymore. I didn't want to just leave the war. I wanted to fix what I did. And that's how my new mission began. The trip back to the United States was a shock. While in the Army, war became all I knew. Now, sitting on a commercial plane, surrounded by passengers going about their lives as normal, I realized how out of place I felt. It was as if I had been ripped from one reality and thrown into another, and nothing seemed real. The plane landed in Washington, and my first decision was to go to my parents' house in Arizona. I had nowhere else to go, but I knew this wouldn't be an easy comeback. My mother cried when she saw me. She held my face in her hands and whispered through tears, "I prayed for this every day. I knew that at some point God would bring you back." My father, on the other hand, didn't react the same way. He was always a man of strict principles, someone who believed that serving his country was one of the greatest honors a man could have. As soon as we were alone, he looked at me with a look of concern. "So that's it? Did you just give up?" I sighed, already expecting that kind of reaction. "Dad, it wasn't an easy decision, but I can't fight this war anymore." He crossed his arms, studying me. "And what are you going to do now? Are you going to spend the rest of your life regretting it, trying to find some way to make up for what you did?" The question hit me deep, because the truth was that I did not know. All I knew was that I needed to find a new path. The following days were strange. I didn't sleep well. When I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those I killed. They weren't nightmares, but memories too vivid to ignore. It was then that I started looking for answers. I read everything I could about near-death experiences, about religion, about spirituality. For the first time, I began to really study the Bible, but I also read about other traditions, trying to understand what had happened to me. I started visiting churches, temples, anywhere I could find people who might understand what I felt. But in all these places, one question kept ringing in my head. Could I be forgiven? I wanted to believe so, but every time I remembered Elias Karim's eyes, every time I saw his young face asking me why, the doubt returned. Until one day, someone said something to me that changed everything. He was an older pastor, a man who had seen a lot in his life. He listened to my story, and when I finished, he just smiled and said, "The wrong question is not whether you can be forgiven. The right question is, can you forgive yourself?" His words stayed with me. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't bring Elijah back, but maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to honor those I lost. And at that moment, I knew what my mission would be. I needed to speak. I needed to tell my story, if only one. If someone could be stopped from walking the same path as me, then maybe my life would still have some purpose. It was time to start. I started talking publicly about my near-death experience. In the beginning, it wasn't easy. I have never been a speaker. My military training taught me to follow orders, not share feelings. But every time I fell silent, the memory of what I saw in hell came back to haunt me. My first speaking engagement was at a small local church. The room was full of veterans, many of them still trying to deal with their own demons. I told my story as honestly as possible, from the moment I was shot until Jesus appeared. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then a man in the back of the room stood up. His face was scarred from years of internal battles. "Are you saying everything we did was wrong? That each of us will end up in hell because we did what we had to do?" The tension in the atmosphere was palpable. I took a deep breath before responding. "I can't say what will happen to each one, but I know what happened to me. I saw what I carried inside me. The pain I caused came back to me like a mirror. Hell wasn't a punishment. It was a truth I never wanted to see." Another man, a younger veteran, shook his head angrily. "So Jesus told you that everything we did was wrong? That we should have just stood by and let our brothers die?" I looked at him, feeling the weight of the question. Jesus didn't tell me I was a monster. He didn't condemn me, but he showed me that I was blind. I thought war brought peace, but all it did was destroy me inside. I didn't realize this before, but now I see that the real battle is not against enemies. It is against the anger and hatred within us. Another silence took over the room. Some seemed to reflect on my words. Others, angry. I knew I wouldn't convince everyone, but that didn't matter. After that talk, I started receiving invitations to speak in other places, churches, veterans support groups, recovery centers. But the biggest test of my journey came when I was approached by a journalist. He was a Palestinian, and his name was Kareem. He had already heard my story and wanted to interview me. "You killed a lot of Palestinians, didn't you?" he asked bluntly. I swallowed hard. "Yes." He looked at me for a long moment before continuing. "And now you want to talk about peace? Do you really believe you can redeem yourself after everything you've done?" I knew this question was coming. I don't know if I can, but I know I need to try. I know that remaining silent is not an option. He studied me for a few more seconds before saying, "I want you to go with me to the West Bank. I want you to see what your war has done to my people." My heart accelerated. The idea of facing the consequences of my actions, of looking into the eyes of those who suffered because of me, terrified me. But then, I remembered Jesus' words, "Forgive, choose peace." I didn't know if those people could forgive me, but maybe, just maybe, this was the final test of whether I could truly forgive myself. So I nodded. I go. My trip to the West Bank was unlike anything else I had ever done in my life. It wasn't like walking into a war zone with a rifle in hand and a bulletproof vest. I wasn't there as a soldier. I was there as a man trying to understand the damage he helped to cause. Journalist Kareem took me inside communities that have been devastated by conflict. I saw potholed streets, buildings reduced to rubble, people who looked at me with suspicion and resentment, and I couldn't blame them. I was the enemy. We went to a school where children were playing in a courtyard surrounded by damaged walls. Some of them were curious to see me, but others moved away, as if they could feel what I carried inside me. Then, Kareem took me to a small, simple house with cracked walls. He knocked on the door and an elderly woman opened it. His gaze fell on me, and I saw a mixture of pain and surprise in his eyes. "This is the man I spoke of," Kareem told her. She continued staring at me for a few seconds before saying, "Between." I sat on a rug on the floor. The woman sat in front of me, with her hands resting on her knees. "Do you know who I am?" His voice was firm but not hostile. I shook my head. She took a deep breath before saying, "My name is Layla Kareem. My grandson was Elias. The air was knocked from my lungs. The name hit me like a blow to the chest. I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry. I tried to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come." Layla studied me for a long moment before continuing. "I waited years to look into the eyes of a man who took the life of someone in my family. I never thought I would have this chance. I felt my body shake. I can't change what I did. I know that saying, 'I'm sorry,' is not enough. I know nothing I say can bring Elijah back. But I need you to know that I see him. I saw him. I saw him where I was. And I will never be the same because of it." His eyes flashed with something that wasn't anger, but wasn't acceptance either. "What do you want from me? Forgiveness?" I shook my head. "I don't expect that. But if there's anything I can do, if there's anything I can try to fix, tell me." She was silent. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, filling the void between us. Then, for the first time, his voice softened a little. "If you really want to do something, then use your story, not to gain pity, not to alleviate your guilt, but to prevent others from following the same path as you." My eyes filled with tears. "I promise." Layla nodded slightly, without saying anything else. I left that house carrying a different weight than when I entered. It wasn't fault. It was responsibility. That day, I knew that my mission was not to seek forgiveness. My mission was to prevent other people from having to ask for forgiveness for the same reason I did. And so, I went on my way, dedicating every day of the rest of my life to speaking about the only truth that mattered. Peace never comes from war. Peace comes from choosing to love. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.